Well guys, I didn't want to make another Jeep video this weekend, but as I sat stranded in the Safeway parking lot in a snowstorm because my starter went out, I realized sometimes opportunities to make videos just present themselves. That's right. So I took the Jeep down to the store the other morning to pick up a couple of some things and actually some ice melt because it was a snowstorm. And I went out and crank up the old Jeep and it just wouldn't crank. I thought my battery was dead, so I had to do the call of shame and have my wife come down and give me a jump start. And even with the other rig hooked up, when I went to crank it, barely turned over enough to get it fired up. So I brought it home, I did a little troubleshooting, and the first thing I checked was the battery voltage, and it was at 13.5 volts. So the battery's good. So I did some continued troubleshooting and figured it was one of my connections. So I cleaned all the contacts on all the wires to the starter, and it still wouldn't crank. So I pulled the starter off, hooked it directly up to the battery, and that old starter would turn over, it would spin, but it just didn't do it with very much enthusiasm. So I guess the old starter gave up the ghost. So that's what I get to do today. But I'm going to take a little different spin on it. I want you guys to follow along and check this out. I did a little research and tried to figure out how I was going to get a new starter for my old 64 CJ5 with the F134 engine in it. I figured those starters probably weren't growing on trees. And sure enough, the auto parts store, they said they could get me a rebuild kit for around 250 bucks, and they could very generously get me a new starter for $895. 895 bucks for a starter for one of these things. I told the guy, I said I don't need a new Jeep. I mean, that's more than we originally had to give for the whole thing. So I said there's got to be another way. So I started doing a little bit of research. I looked on one of the old forums, early CJ5, eCJ5 forum. There's just a ton of good info out there on these old Jeeps. And somebody along the way discovered that instead of using the old original Jeep starter, that you could use a later model Toyota Landcruiser starter. And that it would plug right into that hole and fit and work with just a little bit of modification. So I did a little calling around and I could pick up one of those starters for 60 bucks. So I thought, well, I'm going to try it. Follow along today as we do a little comparison and hopefully we get the old Jeep back up and on the road. Okay guys, here's what we're working with today. This is obviously the starter that came out of the old Jeep. And it's big, it's heavy, it's all things as you imagine would be on that Jeep. Here's what I want to replace it with right here. This Toyota Landcruiser starter. And if you look at it, it looks like they got the same bolt pattern. I've counted the teeth. They both have 9 teeth on the gear. It looks like the wiring should work out pretty close. Let's do a little bit of measuring. I want to get my caliper here and do a little bit of measurement on these things and see just how hard it's going to be to bolt it in and how many modifications I'm going to have to do to this thing. Let's start with this. Here's your part number right here. 16224. Okay, it's for somewhere between a 68 or so and 82 Toyota Landcruiser with the 4.2 inline 6. And it, in theory, bolts right up. But let's test it. Let's check it out. The most obvious concern I have with this is this section that drops in and plugs in to where the starter mounts up. If this doesn't index into the engine right, then it's going to flop around. So I'm concerned about how well that fits. Let's check that. Looks to me like 3 1/4, 3.244 on the old one. Well, that's exactly the same there. 3.243. I'm pretty sure that's going to work. Let's check the next one, our bolt pattern. that seems to be where if there's any modifications, that's where guys are going to have to do them. So I'll measure, we'll do center to center, or I'll do the inside of this bolt hole to the outside of the other one. 4.25. And on this starter, yeah, I've got 4.1. 4.1. Okay, so the bolt holes are a little closer together on this. Let's check the inside here and see what the deal is. Inside of each bolt hole. 3.6 inches on the new starter. .7 inches on the old starter. Okay, so that's what I've heard that guys have to end up doing on these starters to make them fit. They say these bolt holes are just a little bit closer together so a guy can come in and stretch them out, hog them out a little bit, or there's another way to do it, and I'll show you. Here are the bolts that came out of the engine, and the way it plugs in is the top bolt of the starter is just this short guy and bolts through into the transmission behind. And the bottom bolt is actually a bolt through, okay? And it comes all the way through the bell housing and the starter and then bolts up. So, there's two tricks that the guys out there that have done this before say to make this easier. The first one is, in order to make up that slack in the bolt hole size, you can probably get away with it by putting a smaller bolt. So I think that's what I'm going to try, is instead of running this bigger bolt, I'm just running a smaller diameter, a 3/8 bolt. And I think I got the right size. I got a lock washer, some flat washers and everything to go with it. The second trick is this, okay? This is how the starter mounts on the Jeep, and actually it's really not that hard to access the bolts to it because you just come in from the side. It's pretty easy. But this newer starter, when you throw it on there, you got all this stuff in the way in the engine. The side of the engine's right here, so there's not a lot of room to work in here. So they recommend an Allen head bolt. That way I don't have to slide a wrench around it, but instead I can just stick my Allen in there and crank it in. So I bought one of those. The only one I could find was stainless, so I got to pay about $4 for that bolt. Hopefully it's worth it. I think I'm willing to just go out there and try to stab that thing in the Jeep and see if those things line up and see if I can get away with my smaller bolt, my 3/8 bolt on the bottom, so that I don't have to modify these holes and stretch them out any. Let's go out to the Jeep and see if we get lucky. Okay, sorry for the wind out here. It's actually really cold. The sun's out. I was going to complain about how cold it was. It's like, I don't know, 25 degrees out here. And then I started watching Sobering Restorations, their channel, and these two dudes are up in Canada. They're pretty funny. And they were out working on their junk in like 25 below weather just because it's in Canada and that's what they do. So I'm not going to complain. I'm going to do this. All right, here's what we're working with. We're going to try to jam this starter now down in the hole, and I'm going to see just how it kind of lines up. So far, I might get lucky. I'm going to try to put some bolts in and see if this thing will work without modifying the starter at all. If I can't get them to line up, I might have to go get out the die grinder and stretch out those holes a little bit. But let's hope we get lucky. It's always nice and convenient when you get lucky on a project. Alrighty, so first assessment. I'll get right down in here close so you can see. When I plug this starter in all the way, that bolt just doesn't want to quite line up with the hole. So that bolt needs to be able to move up just a touch. I'll do that and then we'll come back and we'll check that bottom hole and see how well it lines up. Alright, so I wallowed out that top hole a little bit, and then I went ahead and plugged it in with my bottom bolt in the hole. Bottom bolt seems to line up no problem. So I'm going to go ahead and try to wrestle this guy back in and see if I can get that top bolt to start. And it should be a piece of cake to zip it in there. What could possibly go wrong? Well, that seemed to work pretty well. Now I'll go ahead and work on the bottom bolt. All right, there it is, guys. You can see the new 3/8 bolt put in here, stuck down, lock washer. I got grade 8 hardware for that. That might be overkill, but you know, I didn't want to mess with it. And then I got the bolt in the top, and honestly, you can probably see this if I put the camera over there. My issue right now is I can't get my dang Allen socket out of the bolt. So I'm gonna wrestle with that for a few minutes, get that out of there, and then I gotta replace my wire hookup with a spade terminal, so it'll slide on there. And then should just be a matter of hooking up the battery cable on the top post. This should be pretty quick, although I got to get that stinking socket out of there. I'm going to give that a rip, and we'll bring this thing back when we're ready to smoke test it. Okay, she's hooked up. Bolts are in. Hooked up with my wire from the ignition to the spade terminal, and then my battery cable and my main charge wire to the rest of the car off the top post. This gray wire does nothing. We're just going to leave that guy dangling. And now I'm going to come in, I'm going to hook up my battery cable and do what I call the smoke test. Okay, it's in. I got my battery hooked up. Let me jump in the rig and give it a test fire, see how this thing works. Well, son of a motherless goat. It appears as though the brand new starter, in which we so expertly installed in the Jeep, also does not want to start the rig. So let's do a little testo here. There, can you guys see it? Of course you can. You're watching a video, it doesn't matter. Here's my voltmeter. Alright, DC volts. Let's hook it up. What does this voltmeter tell me my battery's at? 13.35 volts. I don't know if you can read that. I bet we can hold it up where you can see it. That appears to be a good battery. Wow. When that thing didn't crank over the engine, I thought, well, perhaps my trusty old Harbor Freight voltmeter is suspect. Let's try this guy. I hook this guy up and what do you know? 11.6 volts. I'd have to say the proof is that this voltmeter, piece of junk. I'm going to charge my battery and then see if the starter works. Okay, well, that was interesting. Now that we got the battery charged up and we have our new starter in, let's go ahead and see how it works. Well, the starter works great. Now I gotta figure out why my battery goes dead. Okay, well, so here's what happened. I checked my voltage here at the battery and it showed like 11.8 or something. I checked it on the post at the alternator, showed the same thing. I jiggled my little voltage regulator in the back, checked it again, 13.8 volts. And the amp meter inside verifies this thing's now charging Like a champ. Son of a gun. Okay, so I did a little bit more troubleshooting. Here's the issue. Okay, look, 12.2 volts, but this little external voltage regulator on the back of it, I jiggle this around. There. Now look, she charges. I let it go, she stops charging. Stupid external voltage regulator. Okay, well, you can see with the charged battery, this new starter rips, sounds great, works good, probably lasts a long time. So what did we learn today? Well, we did learn that you can use a later model Toyota Landcruiser starter on one of these old F134 engines almost without any modifications at all. Bolts in pretty easily. I think that's a win. What else did we learn? Well, we learned that my alternator isn't charging correctly because of a goofy external voltage regulator. And we also learned you can't always trust. No, let me rephrase that. You get what you pay for. You get the free voltmeter from Harbor Freight. It just might cost you in the long run because you'll end up buying a new starter. That's all I got. Hey, you win some, you lose some, man. If you like what you saw today, click one of the links you see on your screen now and watch another one of my videos. Thanks.